Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Knights, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. And if you want to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 28 of Breaking Step. Hold up, Jackal said as Jackal called. As Tibs headed for the room's door, the fighter took his pouch of containing, as he called it, back from Dawn. The sorcerer had spent the time holding it. I spent the time he held it, going from glaring at the pouch as he pulled one item or another out, glaring at the pouch as he pulled one item or another out to being amazed. Okay. Held it, going from glaring at the pouch. This is, come on, one or another, to being amazed. His most visible frustration had come as he pulled a long sword Jackal had yet to sell, it being easily 10 times longer than the pouch was deep. He grumbled about books he'd have to ask for as Tibs and Jackal left the room. So, Jackal said, pulling Tibs in a different direction than the one he'd intended to go in. Metal? Tibs nodded. How did you manage that? Jackal asked. Turning them into an alley Tibs recognized as the shortest route to the warehousing neighborhood. And how come you didn't tell me? One of the assassins stabbed me with a sword, but missed my heart. Instead of dying, I had an audience and Jekyll spun Tibs. An assassin? And this is the first time I hear about it? I didn't die, Tibs replied, and I dealt with because you were lucky. Luck isn't a thing. Jekyll glared at him. It's a good thing you dealt with them. It means I don't have to hunt them down. I dealt with all of them. All of them? The fighter asked in dismay. Why is this a question? How? What the bleep? Just how many times did someone try to murder you? And why didn't you tell me? Tib shrugs. I thought you knew. You told me your father would take his revenge after his death. Yes, the attacks on the town, the guards, and your runners I've been dealing with. I figured my father didn't think to tell them about you since you never told me you were targeted. He told them. Yeah, that's kind of obvious now, he replied in exasperation. His expression softened and he let go of Tibs. And you didn't tell me about metal because you didn't want me to know about the attacks, right? Tibs kept pace with the fighter. I just forgot about it. I've been busy. Irdian had his guard looking for where I kept the training supplies until he got them. It took a lot of work to misdirect them for so long. There was also working out how to solve the Dragon Crest puzzle. Then I had to look over the list of what Darren could get me to replace what Irdian stole, figuring how much I would have to spend versus the quality when they'd get here. Give me headaches. And and had gone through nearly all the coins Tibbs had gotten from the sale of the corruption pool. He had underestimated how much he could get by a lot. Not getting a kingdom's worth of arms and armors for him, but he'd have enough to equip the Omega teams with better armor than what the guild provided them, while they looked close enough not to attract attention. Darren had also made arrangements with the owner of the weapons shop for space to store Tibbs' equipment among his wares. It would make it harder for Iridian to notice them. So being busy is also why you didn't train with it, and the reason you were all murder-focused when you channeled it to deal with the lightning? Yes, Tibbs lied. He hadn't known it would help against the lightning. It has just been the closest element to reach for in his confused state. He was surprised Jackal knew metal helped with lightning. Metal is stubborn, not flexible in how she goes about getting what she wants. Metal? Inflexible? Jekyll chuckled. That's funny. Why? Because you know what? Because metal is flexible when it's made correctly. Well, because metal is flexible when it's made correctly. It takes a lot to break a metal sword or piece of armor. I thought it was just because metal's hard. Stone's harder, Jekyll replied. Well, some are. But stone's not flexible, so it's easier to make it shatter than metal. He motioned to the warehouse as it became visible. But for now, you're going to train with it. I don't want that stubbornness to be why Don finds out about you. Do you think telling him about the pouch was a mistake? It's a risk, the fighter answered. But I gave him reasons that work if the guild asks him to explain why I have it. He grinned. Everyone knows I'm so greedy I'd keep something like this. But they are going to know to touch everything to see if someone on the other teams are hiding one or something else. Jekyll's steps faltered. Oh, abyss, I didn't think about that part. Why were you okay with him telling him then? With me telling him then? He isn't lying when he says he wants to be part of the team and when he says he wants to be better. But he invested a lot of time in becoming important to the guild. He might be tempted by that. You're better than I am at figuring people that way. Jekyll considered it. I'll have Mess pay attention. They seem to get along. If Don's going to drop his guard around anyone, it's going to be him, and he can. Tibs stopped the fighter from moving further as he noticed people within his sense. No element, and the faint essence of townsfolk, and without weapons or armor, but inside the unused warehouse. Jekyll touched the ground, then frowned. Not guards, Tibs whispered. Jekyll moved his essence within his body, but his skin kept its tanned hue. He nodded, and they continued. The fighter pulled the door and stepped in as if he owned the place, then stopped, staring at the workers who were gathering the broken result of Tibbs's previous training into a large pile in the center. Can I help you? A woman asked in surprise as she dropped larger pieces of a crate on the pile. We heard noises, Tibbs replied. We came to see what was causing it. Well, it's us. We can move on. Why are you clearing that? Jekyll asked. The owner wants to use it, she replied, so she hired us to make it usable. Of course, she grumbled. She never mentioned the war zone it was. Jekyll frowned. Isn't this Armel's warehouse? He owns the letter shop. No idea about that. We just do the work we get hired from. She nodded to the door. And you two shouldn't be in here. Tibbs exited, and a second later, Jekyll was behind him. Well, that's a problem, the fighter said. Who's Hermel? Tibbs sensed to make sure no one followed them. I didn't know the warehouse was owned. That's because it isn't. Not really. Armel and his leather shop don't exist. Then how was that his warehouse? Jekyll chuckled. My father used businesses that don't exist to get a footing into neighborhoods that kept him out otherwise. We were using it before your father came to Craggle Rock. Jekyll didn't comment, and Tibbs glanced at him. I think this might be how he found out I was here. You needed a place to train, and I know who my father used to create those businesses and the codes to slip in to make sure the agent creating it didn't discuss it with anyone. He has more agents doing that than it's possible to keep count of, so I didn't worry he'd question a specific agent about a specific business that he really shouldn't remember not having created, he sighed. But it's possible that he did. Sorry. Tip shrugged. Can you have another one made? Jekyll shook his head. Right now, my family's in chaos as my brother and sisters wanting control are fighting each other and the rest of our relatives. Everyone my father employed is going to know he's dead, so they aren't going to listen to orders coming from him. Then, whoever ends up in charge is going to need to regain control of those people who think they don't need to worry about my family anymore. That's going to come with changing all the systems in place. And so I'm not going to know those codes or people handling those types of deals. Will whoever stop the attacks on the town? I doubt it, Jekyll said after thinking it over. They aren't going to know how. Everyone knew how vindictive my father was. It's kept even the ones who hated him from trying to replace him. But my father would have made sure that any deal he made to avenge him was done outside of my family's influence. He chuckled. I even wonder if my father left the family any coins to keep going, or if he was so self-centered he dropped it all on his revenge. So this will never end, Tib stated, annoyed. He had more important things to deal to work on than a dead man's revenge. You know what? To deal with. Then a dead man's revenge. The money will run out at some point. How long will it take? No idea. Tibs nodded and wondered how many coins he'd need to get the attacks to stop. That would have been something. That would have been useful to know. Before selling the pool, he could have made sure Daron got him enough. I preferred you when you got angry, Chico said. That isn't useful. But you'd have told me about the attacks and the audience. It wouldn't have mattered, Jekyll snapped. You'd have been pissed and you would have vented to me, and I would have been able to help you deal with those assassins. He took a breath. This cold isn't you, Tibs. It's what I need right now. Jekyll rolled his eyes, but didn't comment. He let out a breath. That audience with metal means you can have more. Which element do you need to get next? I don't know. When I ask water, okay, that's where his comment came from. When I asked water, she said it could be any one I wanted. And of course, you didn't tell me about that audience either, Jekyll said in exasperation. It took him longer to regain control of his temper. Then, which one are you going after? I don't know. The only way I know how to have an audience is to almost die from the element. How do I die from mind? Easy. Think too hard. How about void? Crystal? Wood? Crystal and wood can have weapons made of them, but there are more elements I don't even know what they are. Don can tell you about them, I expect. Should I start looking for a crystal dagger I can plant too close to your heart for comfort? He asked, biting off the words. I'd have to explain why I want to know about all those other elements. Tibs ignored the edge in Jekyll's word. Use the same reason you use to annoy everyone else. You're curious about something you don't know. Yeah, I have no idea how you always get away with answering. I have no idea how you always get them to answer you. I'm a kid. No one gets angry at kids asking questions. Jekyll snorted. Tibs looked over the report Darren had sent him regarding the equipment he'd ordered, with time frames and explanation for the delays, or how some that might arrive early. To avoid attracting attention, they'd arrive with caravans spread over multiple bazaars. That meant that by the time his first shipment arrived, he'd have Upsilon teams among the urchins, and possibly some at Row, if they'd learned quickly. He'd have to hope training would be enough to convince some teams to join him, or they might be beyond his ability to help by the time he had enough equipment. The room was illuminated by a sole lamp when Tibs slipped through the window. The man seated at the table only a silhouette, while the stacks of books were plainly visible. Not that Tibs had any interest in them. Tibs stepped quietly, but Don still looked up from the papers he was writing on. How late is it? He asked. One of the diagrams from the dungeon was before him, with yet more pages with writing on them spread around the table. The letters on the open book were too small for Tibs to make him out. Very. The noble's house had been challenging. A mix of good luck, subtle use of enchantment, and attentive guards. He'd made it to the office and took a silver since he hadn't found copper by the time the guards had begun noticing something amiss. Don snapped the book shut. I don't know what I can get out of these. I'm nowhere strong enough to justify asking my teacher about adding all this to an etching asking how adding all this to etching makes the resulting complexity useful. Did the book tell you that? Those are what merchant. Didn't the books tell you that? Those are what the merchants had on hand. They would lend me, but they're only tangentially related to incorporating the arcanus into etching. The dungeons are powerful enough to draw those who will benefit from those books. I contacted Hanuja regarding more relevant book, but I can't know how long it'll take until she has a reply for me. Tibs glanced at the diagram. That's Ka. It looks too big to be part of a filigree. That's Boar. That Lions is all fet. Dunn narrowed his eyes at him. You aren't even Lambda. How can you recognize any of the arcanus? They look like letters. But the letters aren't called Ka, Boar, or any of that. And what's a filigree? Tib shrugged, indicating the line of Ka close together. When Alistair does etching and puts arcanus into it, they remind me of the filigree that decorates fine goblets or necklaces. I don't know what it's actually called. It's a string. Dunn replied, okay, I shouldn't be surprised you can sense essence work that fine, but that doesn't explain how you know the names. Did, he hesitated, Karina teach you? No, Alistair told me some of them. He told you? Tibs nodded. My teacher only started preparing me to graduate to Zeta, and he barely talks about that level of etching. And yours gave you their names? What's the test? What? Test? Don stared at him, confused. It's about taking the essence I've suffused through my body and pushing it into a specific channel. Once I can make that happen, I'll have graduated to Zeta. He narrowed his eyes. Are you about to tell me you can do that? Tib shook his head. How do you make it happen? He sensed for Dawn's essence, for Dawn's essence. As with everyone with an element, it was tinted with that element's color, and it flowed through him along path Tibbs thought of as channels, but were they the same as what Dawn meant? It's about exercising my mind on, wait, why am I answering you? What is your teacher doing telling you about the arcanus when you're just Ro? Answering my questions. Don rolled his eyes. We had to do things differently from the start because of my age, so why should I stop now? Don watched him. My teacher told me that I couldn't work with the arcanus until my body was stronger. Are you telling me he lied? Tib shrugged. He works for the guild, but, he added, Alistair did warn me there are reasons the guild teaches the way it does. Most of them are about ensuring we survive the process of learning. But that Alistair still teaches them to you. He tapped the diagram. We're rogue, Tibbs answered. Following rules isn't really what we do. And that concludes Chapter 28 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, it is available for free on Royal Road. If you want to read ahead of Royal Road and support me in the process, we're about 20 chapters ahead on my Patreon. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.